everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as I mentioned, as you guys were joining, please share your LinkedIn profiles, ask questions, tell us where you're coming from, what's on your mind, and then obviously, ask us questions as we get into the conversation. So today we have an amazing speaker, Harriet. Some of you know her. Some of you will probably get to know her today. So I love the way her title sounds. So Harriet Cross, Her Majesty's Consul General to New England. Welcome. Harriet, we've kind of looked at your profile. You've just been promoted and you're heading off to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Congratulations on the promotion.
Thank you.
You also have had, and you still have, an amazing career over 20 years. You've served everywhere from Yemen and Morocco to the United Nations. You've dealt with really scary situations when you had to evacuate an embassy. You co-own brewery. You have foster cats. Oh my God. So you are obviously not whenever we think of an ambassador, we think about, those men in suits and stodgy politicians, with all due respect to politicians. But you have an amazing background and a very diverse background. So walk us through a little bit about your career journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Parna. It was really, really nice. And thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to think that people might want to hear what I've got to say. So I appreciate you giving me a platform for that.
Of course.
Nice to see so many friendly faces, and I look forward to getting to know you, those that I don't know already. Yeah, I've had a kind of accidental journey, I suppose, into diplomacy. Although I did join the Foreign Office, which is your equivalent of State Department, once I finished university. So I just always had a love of languages and a love of travel. But I didn't go to a fancy school. I went to a kind of regular state school in East Yorkshire in the north of England. And I remember my careers advisor saying to me, oh, with languages and travel, maybe you want to be an air hostess. That might be like a good career for you. And again, nothing against the career of an air hostess, because it's a fantastic job. But it felt like quite a narrow, it felt like my careers advisor wasn't being as ambitious for me as maybe that person should have been. So I actually went into university. I chose politics and French, just really because I loved those two things. But I didn't really have an ambition as to what I wanted to do when I left university. And then my friend said, oh, I'm going to do these entrance exams for the civil service. And I said, oh yeah, maybe I'll, because they start off with like thousands of people who sit at desks and do kind of multiple choice questionnaires. At least it was way back in the 90s. So I said, oh yeah, maybe I'll do that as well. And then I just kept getting through the stages until I found myself, in the grand oak panelled rooms, talking to these distinguished, starchy ambassadors in suits, thinking, what am I doing here? There's no way I'm going to get through. But I think because I didn't passionately want it, it meant that I could kind of be myself a bit more than maybe I would have been if I was trying to be the person that I thought they wanted me to be. And I think that's something that I've carried through my whole diplomatic career. It does make me, maybe a bit quirky or, slightly unusual diplomat, but I've kind of stayed true to myself as far as I can. You always have to make sacrifices in any job, but particularly a job working for government where you've got to, you're implementing government policy. So there's a certain amount of self that you can bring and a certain amount that you need to hold back. So that's how I got into the diplomatic service, kind of quite by accident. And the postings that you mentioned, again, I chose to go places that fascinated me, that I would find exciting and interesting. And I didn't just want a career ladder that would take me to the next place on the promotion ladder. So again, that's why I've got quite an eclectic CV.
Excellent. Well, I hope more people get into this diplomatic career by accident and do what you're doing. It's like phenomenal. So we appreciate everything that you've done for us here in Boston and will be doing for the world. When we think of the role of a diplomat, it's sometimes I think we kind of see the role as very narrow. Like you said, we only see a portion that's open to the public. Walk us through a little bit about what is the role of a diplomat. And, I know it ranges everything from, diplomacy to technology innovation to business. So just kind of like, what's the life of a diplomat like?
So I think I'd say from the kind of the big picture response to what do diplomats do, what does the Foreign Office do?
Sure.
I would say three top things. One is safeguarding national security. And as a header, there's actually a lot that falls under that. So within that heading, you talk about multilateralism. So my time at the UN, you talk about our NATO membership. So what diplomats in Brussels are doing, what diplomats in Geneva are doing with the World Trade Organization, and in Vienna with the OSCE. So that kind of broad piece of multilateralism work, making global partnerships work in order to protect ourselves nationally. And then within that, you've got counterterrorism work, which again, although sometimes you think, well, that's kind of MI5 and the secret services who do that. Actually, diplomats spend a lot of their time working at the UN on sanctions against terrorist groups. They might be working like I did in Yemen with the Yemeni government to try and strengthen prisons. I mean, quite literally, we spent time in Yemen helping the Yemeni government build walls in prisons to stop Al-Qaeda prisoners getting out. So it can be kind of quite basic, but it protects our security from a distance. And then now increasingly, you've got cybercrime, and diplomats are doing a lot more, again, in a multilateral way to protect our nations against cybercrime. And because cybercrime is borderless, you can't do it as a single nation. You have to do it with the rest of the world. So that's where diplomats come in. I'd say the second big piece of work is what we call prosperity. Again, very simply, creating jobs. Creating jobs for people in the UK necessitates global outreach. And this is what I say a lot in New England, because with certain American policies like the Buy America policy, sometimes the suggestion that if we only buy American, we'll protect American jobs. But actually global trade and international free trade agreements protect national jobs and develop national jobs. So that's a lot of the work that we do here in the consulate. So the trade and investment work, the kind of nuts and bolts of putting companies in touch with each other. And then you've got the bigger picture of the global economic architecture, again, back to the World Trade Organization, making sure that works effectively and that there are global rules that everybody abides by. And then I'd just say, finally, it's about the thing that most people think of when they think of diplomats, I think sometimes, is protecting British citizens abroad. And that's partly about the kind of slightly mundane side of giving emergency passports, helping people if they get put in prison, but it's also about dealing with crisis. So, for example, when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, the British consulate here was immediately working to find out, were British citizens involved? Are they in hospital? Do they need our support? And the COVID crisis is a perfect example of where diplomats from countries all around the world have had to try and make sure their citizens are as safe as they can be, even when they're in other countries. And I was just involved in a massive repatriation effort to bring Brits back from overseas because they were trapped. And you think of New Zealand, oh, well, that's a perfectly happy, safe place. Why could you possibly have to do an evacuation from New Zealand? But New Zealand stopped all flights. You had a ton of British backpackers who were there without any money, then nowhere to live, no possibility of getting out of the country, so we had to help them. So those are kind of the big picture things. And in terms of what diplomats have to be, they need expertise in some or all of those different areas. I'm a real generalist. You can drop me in a job and I'll do it. But there are other people with more kind of economic expertise or consular expertise. We've got to be agile, and I think that is a real kind of tagline for diplomacy of the 21st century. It's not about sitting at a desk writing reports. You're out in the field. You're online looking at cybercrime. You're looking. I mean, with President Trump, the Twitter sphere has become an absolute locus for diplomacy now. You've got to know what's happening on Twitter and social media to be a good diplomat. And then again, more mundanely, it's about management, and it's about running networks, and it's about protecting staff, and protecting your platform, which is what I did in Yemen. I had to make sure our platform was secure, and that we had the right number of armed guards. So it's a massive job, and that's what I love about it, that it's so diverse, and you can jump into a different job, a different role every time you change jobs, and that's what's quite exciting about it.
Wow, I'm exhausted just listening to what you do every day. So thank you for that. So let's kind of come back to Boston for a second. You obviously have a ton of priorities, and you also have passions. So is there like a number one priority or passion that you, even though you're doing, this whole lot of, you have all these responsibilities, but if you were to pick like one passion or priority that you had over the last few years, what would that be?
I think I'd have to say in New England, it's been development of offshore wind technology in New England. And again, it kind of came as a bit of a surprise to me when I first started the job. And again, this is a kind of message to everybody on this call. I started the job and people say, Harriet, what's your number one priority? And what are you going to do? And what are you going to change? And I didn't know New England. I'd just been in Yemen. So it took me a good 6 months to even work out, what I was doing. But then this offshore wind, the relationships really started to build. I mean, there was already clearly a nascent offshore wind capability and desire in New England. But partly because the north of England, where I'm from, Grimsby and Hull, really is a global, one of the world leaders in offshore wind. It kind of sparked my passion to create relationships, because I went to New Bedford in Massachusetts, for example, a former fishing town, a former whaling town, lots in common with places in the north of England. And we created some partnerships between New Bedford and Hull, and that was really satisfying to me. And then you started to see those partnerships, which was first about kind of giving advice. Look, this is where we went wrong in the UK on offshore wind, so this is what we would advise, that you can skip over our mistakes. And then that developed into conversations about supply chains. Okay, what did your supply chains look like? Well, we don't have that piece of the puzzle here in New England, so can we get that from the UK? And then you kind of get the prosperity coming up, where not only are jobs in New England being created from offshore wind, but jobs in the UK are being created as well. So again, quite tangible outcomes from this kind of passion that I had, for helping the north of England where I was from, but also kind of doing the right thing in terms of reducing emissions. So in the UK, for example, 30% of our power is now from offshore wind, which has overtaken fossil fuels for the first time, and that's really important. And I can see New England, which has made commitments. I mean, Massachusetts made a commitment to zero emissions by 2050. Maine has gone even further and committed to zero emissions by 2045. So this ability to kind of share expertise and sort of mutually reinforce our ambitions is really important. Bristol, I want to give a shout out to Bristol Community College here. They do really good work. They're just outside New Bedford. They're about to set up a national offshore wind institute, which will be, one of the best in the USA. They're particularly interested in getting women into the offshore wind industry, which again I think is really interesting, because it can be quite a kind of in terms of the mechanics of it, the people climbing up poles and going out to sea, and it's a difficult industry, but Bristol Community College wants to make it as inclusive an industry as possible, so that's been really satisfying. Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, went to Scotland just earlier this year to look at what they're doing out on kind of way out offshore. So it's really all kind of started to come together as my 4 years ends, and really the relationships are flourishing, and New England is going to be streaks ahead in terms of its renewable capacity in a few years' time. And the thought that I've contributed just in a small way to that is really exciting.
Wow, that's amazing. So you just mentioned about having more women, and I know you are a huge supporter of women entrepreneurs and women leaders, and I have had personally the privilege of participating and being part of some of the women in business, or even the women entrepreneurs who visited us from the UK. So it's always, it's so gratifying to see, despite everything that you have on your plate, you are still supporting women in business, women in technology. So we are all very, very grateful for that. Share with us a little bit about, what are some of your, what memories are you going to take away from Boston as it comes to some of the events that you hosted to support women entrepreneurs, both here in New England as well as from the UK?
You know what, I'm going to jump to a memory that's actually not about women entrepreneurs, but it's about girls. I think diplomacy in sport is a really quite an exciting part of kind of soft power or public diplomacy. And women's football is really getting a lot more exposure than it's ever had. I mean, it's always been there. It's not like, oh, there's this new thing, women play football. Women played football in the 1940s when men went off to war, and thousands of people went to watch them in the UK. So it's not a new thing, but as I say, it's gained more exposure. And Liverpool Football Club is connected to the Red Sox because they've got the same owners. And so we've actually done quite a lot with women in football, and we had some female footballers come over here, and we got a group of sort of 11, 12, 13-year-old girls to come and meet them, girls who were playing football, soccer in the Boston area. And we were talking about empowering women and what it's like to be a girl. And I think we asked at the end of the day, what have you learned? What would you take away from this? And one of the girls said, something that Harriet said and that I'm going to do. She said, if there's not a chair at the table, bring a chair to the table for yourself. And again, that's a quote that I've stolen from somebody else. There's a very famous quote about that. But it gave me so much joy, because that is so important. People won't necessarily, and again, we're going back to women in business, women in tech now, people won't necessarily make a space for you, not necessarily because they're sexist and I don't think women should be at the table, but because they've just made their selection of who should be at the table because of the networks that they're already in, and the people that they already know and that they're comfortable with. So I do think that creating space is really important. And now, again, going to, an emergent issue now, Black Lives Matter, that again has been there for a long time, never mind decades, but centuries. But again, really receiving exposure now. And I think this question of not only making space for women, but making space for women and people of colour at the table is a really important part of what we all need to do to promote diversity and inclusion. And it's a work in progress. In terms of the consulate, frankly, we don't have a very diverse staff at the consulate, and that's something that I'm trying to take a few steps to try and work out how do we change that. And one thing is the language that we use when we're talking, when we're putting out job adverts. Sometimes I think people think you have to be British to work at the British Consulate, and you don't. But also sometimes I think people think you have to be this kind of, maybe you have to be white to work at the British Consulate. And like, why would people think that? Is it because we're using particular language in our job adverts? So I think making sure that language is inclusive, making sure that we advertise in the right places and as broadly as possible, and making sure that we get a robust internship program, which we actually do have, and we get quite a diverse set of interns who come into the office and learn that actually this is a place for me and I can add value, and you British Consulate need me as much as I want to be part of what you're doing. So there's a long way to go, but I do think that that's also very much part of a conversation that we in the Foreign Office are having as much as we are having in the consulate. So it's that, again, gives me. And there's lots of things that, as I say, sometimes being a diplomat, and again, speaking frankly here, you have to you can't always speak your truth about certain things because you won't always agree with the government positions, and that, regardless of what government you're serving, that's the way it's going to be. But in terms of what we call like British values, the UK actively promotes LGBTQ rights around the world. We actively lobby countries to improve what they do on gender identity and sexual orientation. And we're also now saying we haven't done the same in terms of Black Lives Matter. We haven't gone out onto the global stage and said, this is important, this matters. But internally, we're now starting to have those conversations about how can we do that, how should we do that? And that really makes me very proud, because I don't think, sometimes when I've spoken to some of my European colleagues, it hasn't really been on their radar in the same way that it immediately went on the radar of senior leadership in the Foreign Office. And we've got a long way to go. Again, I fully recognise that. But we're ready for the change. I think we're ready to try and help make that happen internally, and then I hope we'll take that out into the world as well. So that was an extremely long answer to a very beautifully concise question, so I'll stop there.
No. Those are all the important things that you just talked about, and issues that matter to, you not just as a politician or as a diplomat, but to the individual. So I think that's a really, that was a very, very awesome answer. Thank you for that. And hey guys, please, feel free to jump in and ask your questions for Harriet. Put it in the chat. And while you do that, so Harriet, what tips would you give to women, especially, or even to younger professionals who may want to pursue a career in diplomacy, or even just be a leader in their respective industry?
I think going back to this point about networking, I do, and oh my goodness, I have learned so much from the Boston networks since I've been here. I think it's something about the US, but it's also something about this particular part of the US that you network so well. I think you network quite inclusively, actually, although it could be a lot better. But I've found that I would go out for a coffee with somebody, they'd say, oh, you should meet such and such a person. And by the time I got back to my desk, they will have done the introduction to the other person. The other person would have emailed me back and already suggested some dates for coffee. That's how good it is in Boston. And I really want to take that away with me when I go elsewhere, because networking and talking to people and getting them enthused for things that enthuse you is really important. And sometimes I think diplomacy is about getting other people to do what you want them to do without them knowing that they're doing what you want them to do. That's a kind of trade secret for you all there. And if you can do that effectively, you're going to be a really good diplomat, and it's really helpful in your personal life as well. When you and your partner are deciding where to go, and you're like, well, I don't really mind. I mean, and then you're kind of like, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, let's do that. So networking, influencing people, being able to communicate well. And again, I'm sure I'm speaking to a room full of people who can do that really well, because you've decided to put yourself in this space where we're communicating and networking. I think negotiating is something else that I would say is critical in any leadership role. And again, it doesn't have to be a classic kind of, I am negotiating to buy this company or buy this piece of software, and how do you negotiate that? But it's about negotiating values. It's about negotiating, gender balance. There's all sorts of things you negotiate in every part of your life. And again, I do aim this more at the women, because I've looked at actually some of the academic literature on this. And I don't think it's biological. I think it's women have been socialized in such a way that makes negotiation harder for them, partly because of expectations that people have of them. So if a woman comes in quite hard on a negotiation, they're like, God, she's a bitch, she's a hard-faced so-and-so. A man comes in hard, they're like, oh, he's good. Oh, yeah, I've really got an adversary here. So partly it's socialization. So understanding how people will react to you as a woman when you're negotiating is part of the battle, I think. But it's a work in progress for me. I'm not a natural negotiator in my personal life. This is something else that the literature says. It says one-on-one, men score better in negotiations than women, but you put a woman in a room and ask her to negotiate on behalf of somebody else for another group of people, and they do it fantastically, because they don't feel that they're being selfish or demanding. They feel that they are being generous, and that's what women are socialized to be. So networking, influencing, negotiating, don't be afraid to ask what you want or what you need. I think, again, particularly now, calling out discrimination should be a lot easier than it's ever been, although it's always a hard thing to do. I think as a leader, we're going to have to be asking our leaders to do that, and not just to think, well, I'm in a room full of peers and I've just heard a sexist or racist or homophobic remark, but you know what, I think it's that, sometimes it's that imposter syndrome that you think, well, I don't really belong here, so I better just keep my mouth shut, and we can't do that any longer. So that's something that, again, I'm personally making a pledge to do more of that as a leader, because you have to be the change that you want to see. And then I think finally, going back to the start actually, which is quite a nice way to sort of finish, is about don't be afraid to be yourself. That's where I started my career, being myself and not pretending to be somebody else. And when I think of some of the kind of really kick-ass female diplomats, Karen Pierce, British ambassador to Washington, is a perfectly good example. Jane Marriott, who's our ambassador in Kenya, is another really good example. They are actually quite, they're quite feminine women. They're not afraid to wear bright colours, high heels, beautiful hairbands, and it doesn't affect their ability to have impact and to kick ass and to be seen as strong, effective, powerful women. I think, and again, the same frankly goes to men. You don't have to think that you have to wear the grey suit, have the deep voice, look like everybody else that you have seen being leaders for the last 60 years. You can now, I think increasingly so, break the mold and be somebody who can be all sorts of effective things that are not necessarily ticking the same boxes as they have done in the past.
Now, those are really great points. Speaking of networking, I think half of you here I've met because of Harriet at different events that I was invited to. And before we wrap up, Harriet, there's a few of us who would like to say bon voyage before you head over. And there's somebody who's loitering over here next to me, so come on over. This is my husband who wants to wish you well, and you and Phil.
Hello, Harriet.
Hi.
Congratulations on your new posting.
Thank you very much.
Parna said that you're abandoning Boston for Trinidad and Tobago for better skiing. Is that true?
Yeah, I've always based my diplomatic choices on how the weather is, and I got it really wrong in Boston. So.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. No, that's okay. It's good.
Yeah, he wanted to know if he could come and say bye to you. I'm like, of course you can. All right, I'm going to open this up now. Leslie, I see you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to say anything to Harriet?
Oh, well, I mean, we're all really going to miss you. I mean, as you said, you talked about being yourself. You're just such a wonderfully just unique and just interesting person. And it's been so much fun to see somebody out of the mold of like we've talked about. And I'm glad that through social media, we're going to get to track your future adventures and see what you're up to, and see how the cats are doing, and see what the vegan options are down in Trinidad and Tobago, and see your morning jogs and what you're new. I'm going to miss seeing you on the Boston Common in the weekend mornings, but but that will be fun. And a brief thanks that, as Parna knows, and of course, we tried to start up another networking group for women around international trade. And in the very, very early days, like the idea stage, you just kind of grabbed it and said, I'll host you guys and help get it off the ground. And women from 6 New England states showed up, and it was just such a wonderful evening of just warmth and connection. And now we've got some running room, and, have kept it going. And really, it's thanks to you. I don't think without your buy-in and kind of putting a stamp of, officialdom on it, it would have taken off. So my personal thanks. And you were one of the first people I met when I came back to Boston after a long time in DC, and just have nice memories of getting to know you personally too. So all the best, and I hope you have a great next chapter.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, you were one of the people who I count in that whole kind of getting introduced by somebody else, and really lots of sparks came out of that. And again, you're somebody that I've really admired as somebody who was doing a really high-powered job, and you stepped out of that to start your own business. which is an immensely scary thing to do. I know that, and you've made a success of it, which is fantastic. So I wish you all the best as well as that business flourishes in the coming years.
Michelle, I see you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah. Harriet, hey. So yeah, Michelle Lampa here. I used to work with Harriet, and I just want to say, wish you and Phil and the cats all the best. You have been a huge inspiration to me. Even so, with regards to diversity, Harriet, I've spoken to Harriet at length about this, even when I started the diversity issues that I've already faced. Yes, they do believe that if you work for the British Consulate, you should at least have an accent. Unfortunately, I have a California one that sometimes comes out in a really bad way, but Harriet has always had my back. I remember seriously being at a round table where a guy, he was the COO of a company who literally tried mansplaining to us about the fact that there was no diversity issues in Boston.
Discrimination.
Yet I was the only person of color in the room. And so it was just, he actually tried going up to me being like, right? And me being like, are you really? Really? The room. And Harriet had no problem in, just calling it out. And that in itself has been really inspiring to me. And me in my new role, even when it comes down to hiring or even all the events that we do, I've made it a point to make sure that diversity is a part of what we do. In quantum tech and even lasers, let's just say that there are not a lot of women, and even for persons of color, it's hard to find. And the direct representation and even the challenges we've already faced have been a lot, but I've taken a lot of Harriet's lead, and I've called it out on more than one occasion. And even though with Black Lives Matter and the current situation, let's just say I've had to still call it out, because it's just one of those smack my head moments, like, really, you just said that, like, on a general chat in front of everyone so that everyone can see that, and you're a leader in this department. And I just realized that there's a lot of work to still be done. And I'm just glad that, I've had the opportunity to work with Harriet, to have, all the things, the greatness that Harriet has actually been able to provide to even the Boston area, but also to my own life. And I hope that we can extend that out and also share that in the future. So I hope to one day go to Trinidad and Tobago and visit you and still keep in touch, at least via like LinkedIn or anything else. And seriously, we're gonna miss you here in Boston. Just know that you've got someone in your corner, 110%. Anytime you come back.
That's so nice. Thank you so much, Michelle. Again, I have to say, Michelle's somebody who's gone on to this fabulous career from the consulate, and really has done it with 2 young children as well, which is, I've got so much respect for your ability to multitask. It's phenomenal. But I'm conscious that you've asked a question in the chat as well, and I didn't want to be seen to be dodging that. You're asking about access to talent, particularly in the UK and US. And yes, I think both countries have changed visa regulations recently. I guess what I'd say to that is that we're in the process of negotiating a free trade agreement between the UK and the US. And I've no doubt that as part of that, there will be enhanced visa regimes. Now, I don't know when it will be agreed, as soon as possible as far as the UK is concerned. But you're absolutely right that talent is critical to that whole prosperity piece that I was talking about. If people can't physically come and work and exchange expertise, it's really not going to work very well. So I think, we'll see. I mean, and the US, as far as I understand it, the US the US changes are temporary. So let's see how that comes out. Yeah. But thanks for all the kind words that you said as well, Michelle. That's really nice. I look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Harriet.
Well, Harriet, we could be here all afternoon, but on behalf of Boston, for all of us here and everybody in New England, we thank you for everything that you've done for us, and bon voyage. Have all the best in your new role, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch. And if there's anything we can do for you anytime, you know where to find us. So thank you so much again for being here, and everybody, thank you for joining us today. Stay safe.
Thanks, Parna. Thanks, everybody. Connect to me on LinkedIn if you're not already, everybody. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot.
Bye.
Bye.